Hi everyone, I'm Jack Thremling Raconteur, and I hope that you're doing well. I'd like to share some thoughts on The Elementals by Michael McDowell. It's a horror novel from 1981 that I really enjoyed reading. It's a perfect summertime read because it's soporifically hot outside, but this book is startlingly hot. It'll keep you up. It's Southern Gothic that's Southern fried, and it really is a book that lives in its setting, which is Beldam for the most part, this little tiny space. It's not even a village. There's just 3 houses from the 19th century out on the southern coast of Alabama, right there with the beach and the surf coming in, a little lagoon behind them. It's hard to reach this place. We're isolated. The characters are isolated. And then weird things start to happen. I mentioned the Southern Gothic. There's something that feels like ghosts, feels like spirits, but it's never quite that. It's never quite that. And those are the elementals, which are described as: what's in that house, child, knows more than you know. What's in that house don't come out of your mind. It don't have to worry about rules, and behaving like a spirit ought to behave. It does what it does to fool you. It wants to trick you into believing what's not right. It got no truth to it. What it did last week, it's not going to be doing today. You see something in there, it wasn't there yesterday, it's not going to be there tomorrow. You stand at one of them doors thinking something's behind it, nothing's behind it. It's waiting for you upstairs, it's waiting for you downstairs, it's standing behind you. And we start to find out that these elementals have been around, that other characters have experienced them. Our sort of window into the book, for the most part, is character India, who's the daughter, sort of the 3rd generation of a family that's owned these houses since the 1950s. And they come out and they vacation out on these houses. And they're sort of this grand old family, the Savages. That's a name to pay attention to, who originally built the houses but owned them. But the McCraes have become their neighbors and they're good friends over the years. And one of the McCraes married one of the Savages. We open with this weird funeral for the Marion Savage, the mother who's just passed away. And we see this Savage family tradition about what happens at their funeral. And then we start to learn why that tradition exists. And that's the Southern Gothic side. It feels like, whoa, this is a little different. It's not unlike what we find sometimes in the stories of M.R. James. It's very effective. But then we head to Beldam. And India, who's grown up in New York City, is there with her father, Luker McCrae. And again, he had spent his adolescence out on these houses out there on the surf. She's never been before. And she starts to realize that this is a different place. The silence of the place oppressed her. All her life, she had lived in the city where night was characterized not by blackness, but only by a relative diminution of light. There were street lamps and neon signs and uncurtained windows, car headlamps and a haze of red reflected light that covered New York from sundown until dawn. At Beldam, in the night, light was extinguished, and India was as if stricken blind. The silence of the place oppressed her. The waves that broke on the shore a few dozen yards distant were an irritating reverberation in her ears and seemed unconnected to any physical source. India felt that the unpredictable and ever-changing pattern of the noise, which was all the more static and monotonous for its undeviating inconstancy, covered a real silence in the place, a sinister, waiting silence. Things might move and things might shift themselves without her being able to hear them over the powerful thunder of the waves. She'd been awakened by some jarring noise beneath the regular surf, and, knowing that whatever had spoken in the 3rd house, she'd gone immediately to the window. She stood fingering the curtain and cocked her ear. Perhaps the noises she heard after that, creaking doors and breaking glass, were but her imagination. In the waves one could hear anything, the siren's call or the scraping tread of the dead on the sand. The windows of the 3rd house began to reflect the lightning sky in the east. The panes of glass burned a cold gray, while the rest of the house remained the same undifferentiated black as the sky beyond it. Well, that's a different setting. And that 3rd house is sort of a haunted house. But overall, we feel that this almost oppressive heat that just lulls our characters sort of to become unwary. And then gradually they start to notice little things. They catch little details. But the way that McDowell crafts the story, there are these sudden incursions of characters onto Beldam or into the lives of the McCraes and Savages who are just sort of trying to be out there, trying to relax, trying to sort of get away from everything. For some characters, the death of their mother or their mother-in-law. For other characters, this sense that things maybe haven't gone quite as they wanted in the past 10 years of their lives, that their marriages, their relationships, their relationships with their children have sort of shifted and changed, not necessarily in the way they expected. And so everybody's sort of escaping from this. And it remains a very fascinating book, though. But that heat is something. The heat, which had been terrible so early in the morning, had only increased with the hours. No cloud hid the sun. It was low tide, and they were the hotter for the increased yardage of sand to reflect the light. Vapor steamed off St. Elmo's lagoon in such density that it obscured the peninsular mainland. Big Barbara went into her room and lay down with the fan blowing directly in her face, but soon enough, she turned her face away because it blew only hot air. For the first time in her weakness, she wept for wanting a drink. Luker sat in a corner of his room on a rush mat and watched the perspiration drip from his crooked elbows and the inside of his knees. India had collapsed feverish across the foot of her bed, with her mouth gaping and contracting like that of a dying fish. Downstairs, Dauphine lay in his bathing suit in the hammock and rocked himself by means of a cane pole that he pushed against the wall. Odessa sat nearby, holding her Bible far away from her so that her sweating hands would not stain the pages. The sounds in that house were the creaking of the hammock hardware, the occasional turning of the thin pages of Odessa's Bible, Luker and India's uneven and heavy breath, and Big Barbara's pillow-stifled weeping. Lee was alone in the Savage house, and Lee was the first to whom something happened that day. And so there is that sense of character sweating and trying to breathe. McDowell really brings that out. And then he shifts that and uses those different characterizations we have, these physical needs that we all have experienced and that we possess. He takes that and he uses that as this vehicle to then shift so that we can then feel characters' terror, their fear, this horror that builds for them, because he's built these little mannerisms into what it's like to feel hot, what it's like to feel hungry, or hungry but you can't eat anything because it's so hot. He takes all of those little pieces and weaves it together to get these three-dimensional characters feeling, so that when they feel terror, we as readers feel it too, and it's very effective. Now, I don't want to go into spoilers, but I am going to include one last little reading to give just a little sense of the horror. So if you don't want to listen to that, you can just stop right after I give my recommended if you like, but I will close with one last sort of horror reading from the book. In terms of what I was reminded of, I had mentioned M.R. James. There is this Southern Gothic element. We see life at a sort of campaign picnic on the 4th of July in Alabama. There are elements that feel akin to Flannery O'Connor, in part because the Savage family, the Savages, are Catholic, and so that sort of feels closer to what O'Connor's going for in some of her stories, in her novels. I would also add The Great Ghost Story by Peter Straub. I think that's maybe the closest I felt to what was going on here in the Elementals, but I absolutely loved it. And now for a little horror reading. Something was leaning against the turret. On its shadowed shingles, the outline of an emaciated figure, something not much more than a skeleton wrapped in a tissue of flesh, was evidently trying to escape the camera's lens by leaning very close along the line of the turret. But the protruding ribs showed a little against the sky, as did the chin and jaw of the thrown-back head. The knees and spindly thighs could be seen, but the lower legs and feet were buried in the sand that covered the veranda roof. Whatever it was had been the same color as the slate-gray shingles. The long fingers of one withered hand protruded onto the sunlit portion of the turret. It appeared that whatever this was, had been caught as it scurried around the turret, out of the sight of India and Odessa in the yard. It's very effective. So, let me know if you read The Elementals. Let me know if you have other books by Michael McDowell that you really enjoy. I loved this. I first discovered it on Michael K. Vaughan's top 10 horror novels, or his favorite horror novels. I'll try to link that video in the description box below. And again, I hope everybody's having a wonderful hot summer. Thanks.